dear friends. The topic that I'm sharing today is asking good questions. So before I start it, I want to ask you guys, what do you think about good questions? Angela?
Meaningful questions.
Oh, you have the same thought as me. When I first see good questions, I think it's meaningful questions too. Okay, so let's see the outlines. I have separated the presentation into two parts. The first part is giving and seeking advice, as well as getting clued in. And the next part is 5 worst questions that you should avoid in interviews. So let's get started. First of all, we need to name the person who gives advice, called advice giver, and the other person who seeks for advice, called advice seeker. The advice giver is usually very established and busy, so they have those experiences to give you advice. So let's see Jerry and Tom as for instance. So Jerry wants to give advice to Tom, but he is very busy, so he has no time to think of a lot of advice for Tom. So he would come with the most cognitive ease to have the simplest advice instead of the most correct advice. So in this situation, the poor Tom will think of the simplest advice as the best advice, since Jerry is very established. He trusts his expertise, so he has the reciprocal challenge to think that if the advice he gave is the best advice. So the next part, the most important key to exclude all this situation is emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? It is similar to emotional quotients, aka EQ, as we all know. So one of the most important core attributes between two emotionally intelligence exchange is that Jerry will give Tom the support response rather than shift response. So what is support response and shift response? In the shift response, Jerry will move the focus from Tom to himself. So this kind of response will be all around the advice giver. So this kind of response will be like, you should do blah blah blah. So it will be generic, like everyone knows, and it will be rooted in Tom's experience. On the contrary, in the support response, the focus will move from the giver itself to Tom. So the most important questions to make good questions is to make a lot of questions. So support response will give the advice seeker a lot of questions. Sometimes even you are an advice seeker, you would think that the quality of advice will be better if the number of questions will be more. And the most useful support response is, what do you think you should do? So you can see that it is a question and it is around the advice seeker. And the most important bottom line is, advice offered with emotional intelligence is the better. So how could we come with advice offered with emotional intelligence? Let's see some examples. So, Melody, could you read the questions?
Should I go back to school and get another degree?
Okay, and Sam, could you read the shift response for us?
I certainly never regretted getting my MBA.
So you can see in the shift response, the responder just used, I certainly never regretted getting my MBA. He was using himself's experience to talk about the response. However, it is helpless and unnecessary to the advice seeker. So, Jerry, could you read the support response?
What would you plan to do with the degree? What's the opportunity cost of pursuing it?
Thank you. So this kind of response will give questions. So there's a lot of question marks, and it will be, what would you plan to do? So it will give the advice seeker more time to think about the answer and have the answer in his mind. So let's see another example. Emmy, could you read the question?
Should I break up with my significant other?
And Daniel, should respond.
If you're asking the question, the answer is almost certainly yes.
So this kind of response is, as I mentioned, is generic, like everyone knows. So it is unnecessary to the advice seeker. And Catherine, could you read the support response?
I really love what kinds of problem are you facing? What do you think he or she wants to do?
Okay, so in this response, you could see there's a lot of question marks. So it will give the advice seeker a more better way to think of the solutions to his problems. Okay, so the next part is 5 worst questions in interviews. The first question is, you have 1 minute to persuade me to buy this pen. This kind of questions is very common in interview because the employer wants to see if you could come up with the idea and give detailed explanations about your thinking. So, however, the candidates will feel like the employers wants to throw them a curveball and they need to perform in a short time at the drop of the hat. So they will feel put on the spot and thrown off track because they need to think of a lot of details in a short time. Okay, so the next question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? This kind of questions is more reasonable because the boss wants to see if you have future goals and you have some dreams about your future. But the candidates will feel hesitant about their long-term goals because they enter this interview just wants to see if they are possible to enter. But there are so many assumptions of acceptable career paths. So they are uncertain about their future. So they are maybe embarrassed to talk about their future lives. Okay, and next is, why should we hire you? This is a fundamental premise during the whole interview process. However, they will feel like, although it is a good chance to introduce yourself and say how good you are to your boss, but it is kind of embarrassed to assert your value to your prospective employer. Number 4 is describe a time when you failed and how you handled it. It would be better to give constructive questions rather than giving questions like you are failed. Because if you think you are failed, you will be like not positive. So giving constructive questions like, how do you overcome this kind of problems, or how do you conquer the obstacles during your life? And number 5 is, why do you want this job? It is a very common question in interview. The candidates will feel embarrassed to scrutinize their intentions because most of the answers will be functional more than aspirational. So they will feel stressful to say that. Would you say, I want money to your boss? No, right? So this kind of question they don't like to ask. So after the 5 questions,
Celine,
what do you think you really hate? You want to delete it forever?
I think is, what would you think?
Yes.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
And why?
Because sometimes
Sometimes you don't know what's
I
your
don't
future.
know where is the direction of what I'm going to do, because life is always unexpected.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. So to me, I would say is number 5 because I think it is just lying to your boss. And in the future, we will have interviews with our professors in universities. And I think it is just boosting their school, how good they are, and it is just lying. So for the closing thoughts, To make good questions is to give appropriate and relevant to the position that people are applying for. And don't give personal or too intrusive questions to the candidates. So all in all, give good questions. That's all from me. Thank you.